everybody, those who are here and also those who are joining us from the cyberspace. Tonight we are studying a new series which is entitled The Yoga of Theosophy. And during 4 weeks, every Wednesday, we are going to explore a different aspect of this yoga of theosophy. The word yoga today is used in a kind of universal way. It's a Sanskrit word, but it's not only used in the context of Hinduism, but also in different traditions as a way to explain or to denominate different paths of spiritual development. The literal meaning of the word is to unite or to gather. Yoga means to bring together. Now, from the Hindu point of view, it's difficult to really know why they chose this word yoga for the spiritual path, because from this point of view, what spiritual enlightenment means is that the spiritual consciousness, which is entangled in matter, is separated from matter. This is how the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali explain what the purpose of the spiritual evolution is. So it's not really a question of uniting anything, but of separating consciousness from matter. But from a theosophical point of view, the idea of uniting is a very deep one, because in theosophy we consider that there is one single principle, one single consciousness that is the background of everything in the universe, both of consciousness and matter. And it is our personal consciousness which seems to be separated, that has to be united with the whole, with the one consciousness. It's not that they are really separated. It is our illusion, it's the way we perceive it. But from our point of view, we can say that it's like trying to unite that is an integral part, but seems to be and to work separated. So yoga means a union with the whole, with the totality. And theosophy is a word that is a Greek word, or derives from a Greek word, that means divine wisdom. This means a wisdom that is not the outcome of any mental process, a wisdom that is beyond our human intelligence. This doesn't mean that it's beyond human beings, because we consider that the divine is part of every human being and part of everything else also. So theosophy is that state of wisdom that every one of us can reach as we unite our consciousness with the divine, with this one consciousness that we were talking about. So the yoga of theosophy is this path that will lead us to that state of consciousness where we realize truth and where we can realize the unity of everything that is behind all the diversity that we perceive. And this particular path has certain elements that are very particular, again, of the theosophical view. You know, we have several ways, several paths of spiritual training. In Hinduism, we have some paths that are based on a dualistic view of the universe, or paths that are based on a non-dualistic view of the universe. That is, some paths say spirit and matter are two different things, and the problem is that the pure consciousness, the pure spirit, is entangled in matter. So we have to separate it. That's what I was explaining when mentioning the Yoga Sutras. Other paths in Hinduism, they say, well, there is only consciousness, And matter is just the other end of consciousness. There is only one principle, and we call it consciousness and matter, but it's something that involves both. So there is not real difference between subject and object, spirit and matter, between this duality. Then in some other spiritual traditions, they are more based on the development of faith in the deity, in the divine, or in those expressions of the divine, the holy saviors that come to help humanity. And so there are different spiritual paths, different views, and according to the view that each tradition has, is how they set up the spiritual training, so to say. In the Theosophical Society, since it is based on the theosophical view of life and the universe, there is a particular approach. But I must say that in the Theosophical Society, we not only try to study and investigate the theosophical point of view, but also every other point of view. So there is not an official spiritual path that the person or the member of the Theosophical Society is expected to follow. Each person is completely free to choose their own spiritual path. But one of them is what we could call the theosophical path, which is not better or worse than any other. It's just particular, as every path is. So in this series, we are going to examine some of the features of this theosophical path of development, or this yoga of theosophy. One of the main features that I think is pretty distinctive of theosophy is that the main aim for the spiritual path is not to attain a personal end, whether it is to reach heaven or to reach liberation or nirvana. All these are different aims in different spiritual paths that are mainly concerned with the individual. The individual, the religious person, is trying to get closer to the deity or to get away from the cycle of incarnation and death, or is trying to get to a state of bliss. It's a personal path, which is not necessary. I'm not saying that is good or bad. It's just a fact that usually it's an individual path. In the Theosophical Society, we have a different view, a different source of inspiration. And this comes from the idea that we are all part of one single reality, of one single consciousness. So we are not really different. We are different expressions of one single principle. To seek for the liberation of the individual is something that is based on illusion, because there is no individual in the ultimate sense. We are all one. But also this realization of unity, this sense of identification with everything around, induces a sense of love for humanity. If the practice is correct, if one is earnest, a love for humanity is little by little developed, because we can see, we can realize more and more that the connection that is between all of us. So the same way that a mother wouldn't leave their kids and just go to another country and live away from them just to enjoy a nice vacations forever, in the same way that she wouldn't do it out of love, a spiritual seeker wouldn't try to reach nirvana or a state of bliss and forget everything about all the other fellow human beings to whom he loves, to whom he feels deeply that they are one with him. So, in the theosophical view, the concern is with the whole. And out of this, as we are going to see in one of the talks, out of this comes this strong sense of service, the need to be of service to humanity. Service in a deep sense, not only giving food and clothes to those who are in need, although that is good, but service in the sense of seeing how we can help all humanity to be liberated. Because all humanity is part of ourselves. We are not different. But on the relative plane, there is suffering on each expression of this one consciousness. So the view in Theosophy is that we can get free from suffering through a process of growth, of spiritual growth, spiritual evolution. As the soul goes through different experiences, either in this life or in several lives, according to what your belief is. But as the soul goes through different experiences, it matures and it begins to develop, to discover what truth is. And since the hypothesis in Theosophy is that the truth is one, that means that every selfish action goes against this truth. Because selfish actions are actions that we do to benefit one part of the whole, which is me or each one of you. And anything that will benefit one part of the whole and damages the rest is damaging the whole, in a sense. You know, all these things are difficult to explain. We are just giving like examples, like images, so we can understand more or less the spirit of truth. But truth, we have always to remember that is beyond any description. Any description falls short of truth. But some images, some ideas may be useful to help us look at the right direction so that we can see truth by ourselves. So I was saying that in this process of spiritual evolution, a human being may reach what in some religions they call enlightenment or perfection. It may reach a state where he or she realizes the truth and therefore is free from sorrow, free from ignorance, free from a confused view. And it is only then when a person is free from the suffering and conflicts and doubts that are part of we human beings, it is only when somebody is free from that can really help humanity. Otherwise, we are more or less the blind leading the blind. We are all caught in our problems, and we are trying to help each other with all these things, and we do help each other, but the real radical help can be given only when we are free from the illness, so to say, when we are free from the realm of illusion. So this is why, from a theosophical point of view, we are trying to get rid of illusion. We are trying to reach enlightenment, because it is only then that we can really help humanity. Now, this may seem artificial, because if it is not genuine, it's just an idea. A person comes, and that person is suffering, and the person just wants to get rid of his or her suffering. But as we go deeper into the theosophical studies, as we are going to examine in the following talks, we little by little realize that there is no freedom from suffering when we are trying to work for the individual. Then we realize that there is no individual. And as I said, as we realize that we are not really different from the rest, the sense of love begins to really appear. And as this sense of love appears, then the need to help also appears. So, although we may say at the beginning that the purpose of the yoga of Theosophy is not so much personal liberation, but the liberation of the whole humanity, although we can say that at the beginning, to get to a real or deeper realization of this, we need to grow, to mature in this particular spiritual path, so that this view, this feeling is genuine, is real. So this is, but I want to mention this first, but because this is the whole background of the yoga of Theosophy. Sometimes when the Theosophical Society was founded in the West, very few people had the idea that, or knew that there is such a thing as enlightened beings. Most of us in the West had the idea of saints or prophets, but not the idea that there can be a person that realizes truth. And the Theosophical Society said this is an idea that was always there in religions at the beginning, but that little by little we forgot. And there are today, right now, liberated beings that in the Theosophical Society we call the Masters of Wisdom. And these human beings, perfected human beings, are in touch with humanity, trying to help humanity. Some of them appear from time to time as a spiritual teacher, or some of them are helping in very different ways. I don't want to enter into too much detail because it's a complex subject. But the idea is that these Masters of Wisdom are there specifically to help humanity. They could have gone or get absorbed in a state of bliss, but they renounced to that state in order to keep in touch with humanity and be able to help. This idea is also in some schools of Buddhism with the concept of the bodhisattva, which wasn't known in the West when the Theosophical Society was founded. So the concept of the bodhisattva is that there are some beings that have reached perfection and they could become a Buddha and go in a state of nirvana, but that would mean that they are completely released from the world of illusion and they lose touch with humanity. So they prefer to delay their entering in nirvana until the whole humanity can be enlightened. So this is a very inspiring idea, which from the theosophical point of view is not only an idea, but it's a reality. And as I said, this is a whole background of the yoga of Theosophy, of why we are trying to get rid or get liberated. Of course, there is an individual path in the sense that we all have to do that by ourselves. Although we can help each other, and the Masters of Wisdom are there trying to help humanity, it is, of course, our responsibility to awaken to truth. Nobody can do it but for ourselves. But at the same time, there is a general aid that can be done. If there were no spiritual teachers, for example, we wouldn't know what to do, how to deal with our things. So they help, but their help is limited because we are the ones that have to listen to the teachings and to apply them. So in this way, the general aim of liberation of the whole humanity embraces also the individual responsibility. And we will see that as we liberate ourselves from the illusion, we are impacting the whole humanity to a certain extent. But we are going to see that later. Another interesting feature of this particular view of the spiritual development is that no single path, no single action or discipline is enough to discover truth. For example, today the meditation is a pretty well-known discipline, and Theosophy says that meditation is something very important. But some schools or some traditions seem to overemphasize meditation. There seems to be an idea that if we could be the whole day meditating, that would be enough for us to get enlightened. From the theosophical point of view, that is not true. Meditation is very important, but that would have a certain area where it can work within us. It can work to a certain extent, but if we are not working on different aspects of our nature, that practice of meditation will not go further. So, or the same with study. Study is important. We need to get a different view of life. We need to purify our perception, and we need to finally perceive truth. But if the only thing that we do is to study, there is a point where we cannot go further. And the same can be said of good actions or service or the path of helping others. That also has its own limitation. A person that has no wisdom may want to help and yet do more harm than help. So let me read, for example, in Light on the Path, which is a small book with some rules, so to say, for the spiritual path. It's a very deep book. And there is a rule that says, seek out the way, the spiritual path. And then it says, seek it not by one road. To each temperament, there is one road which seems the most desirable. But the way is not found by devotion alone, by religious contemplation alone, by ardent progress, by self-sacrificing labor, by studious observation of life. None alone can take the disciple more than one step onward. All steps are necessary to make up the ladder. So this is something prevalent in the theosophical view. We need to develop our being in a holistic way. It's a very holistic approach. We need to develop on parallel lines on a physical, emotional, intellectual, moral, and spiritual aspect. We need to approach life as a totality. We cannot, or we don't believe from this point of view that meditating in my room and then living my life the same way that I used to live it will do much good. Or that loading my mind with data, with information, even if it is the sacred scriptures, that very fact will produce any particular change. We need a holistic approach so that we can develop all the aspects of our nature. Of course, we have different tendencies. A person is more devotional, a person is more intellectual or more practical, and that is natural. But there is a tendency to overemphasize whatever is easier for us, because it's the path of least resistance. So an intellectual person tends to say, oh, emotions are not necessary, they are an obstacle, or don't waste your time with practical things. What matters is that your mind can be expanded. Or an emotional person would say, oh, your mind is only in the way of God or right perception. The mind is always interfering. We don't need to work with our minds. We need to get rid of the mind. Or, there are these views that if we examine ourselves, I think most of the times it's just a way not to face things that are not comfortable for us. And probably if something is not comfortable for us, it's because we are not well developed in that aspect. It's because we need to work on that aspect. So we will always have our own tendency, but I think it's a good idea to try to develop also the other sides of our nature. Always, an intellectual person will not be devotional in a very emotional way, but there is a devotion, a deep devotion that can be can awaken in an intellectual person. An emotional or more devotional person probably will not have a conceptual view of life so intricate as the intellectual person, but there can be a deep intelligence in a devotional person, and so with any particular path. So this is something that usually is stressed, that it is necessary to create a holistic development. Otherwise, when we grow too much in one direction, we begin to be unbalanced, and we can fall into any aspect of our nature has its own dangers. One of the Mahatma one letter that one of the Masters of Wisdom sent to one early Theosophist said, evil is the exaggeration of good. Something that is good, when you go too much into it, you develop it too much, it becomes evil. For example, it is good to be a person that has devotion, but if you go over the top, you become a fanatic, and you may kill people out of your devotion. And you may be sincere. You really think that you are saving the world with that. Or you can take any quality that is a good quality in its right measure, and if you take it to the extreme, as you go to the extreme, it becomes to be something evil or harmful or wrong. So the same may happen with our development. We have to take care that we grow in a more or less balanced way. Then another important aspect is that the theosophical view of spiritual life is that it should be practiced in our daily life. It's not good to try to retire ourselves to a forest or to the mountain. It's not going to produce any good, because the problem is basically our own personality, our patterns of reaction, our lack of understanding, our unconscious problems or conflicts that we have. And wherever we go with ourselves. We are there. So even if I go to a forest, I am there with all my problems. And when I retire from the world, many things may seem to disappear because there is nothing there that is stimulating those reactions. And in Theosophy, we call these patterns of reactions, we call them skandhas. This is a word that is used a lot in Buddhism also. So we say that these skandhas are like patterns of reactions, habits, physical, emotional, mental, are ways of acting, reacting, seeing things. Now, when they are not stimulated, they may fall into a state of latency, but that doesn't mean that you are eliminating them. As soon as you have again the stimulus, then the skandha will again activate and react. So what we really need is daily life, relationships, in order to be able to work on our things. Krishnamurti used to say that relationships are our own mirror, because it is only through relationship that we can discover our reactions. We can discover, why does this affect me? Why did I do that? we can discover that some features of ourselves may be harmful for people. Or we can discover also that some features of ourselves may be helpful. So it is only in the interaction with life, in this facing the challenges, in this wonderful place of experiences that is life, that we can discover ourselves and that we can work on ourselves. If we are earnest, life begins to assume a kind of order, and we can see how things that happen to us, they have a purpose. We see that it seems that life is bringing situations for us to work on a particular aspect of ourselves. At the beginning, we don't see it, and we just react to something. But if we are trying to learn from life, from ourselves, we begin to see a pattern. We begin to see that we fall in similar situations. And we have right there the opportunity to work on ourselves, the opportunity to discover what is going on, to understand why we are reacting in a certain way, and to work on that when it is manifested, when it is right there. If it is hidden in our consciousness, how can we work on that? And the idea because in some other philosophies, the idea is that liberation may be attained when we stop doing wrong actions. When we stop performing things that are wrong, then we can reach heaven or liberation or nirvana. So from this point of view, it makes sense. Let's go to a forest, then I don't damage anything, and therefore I can be a good person. But the theosophical view is that there is such a thing as evolution, as I said. This idea of spiritual evolution, before the Theosophical Society was founded, was not there. There is a Sufi, Rumi, that he says, I was sleeping in the mineral, I was awakening a little in the vegetable, then in the animal. And so he describes a kind of evolution of consciousness through different kingdoms. But was not a very prevalent idea. The idea mainly was in Buddhism and Hinduism that because of the bad karma, the bad actions, we were caught in the wheel of reincarnation. So you have to stop doing bad things, you have to accumulate good actions to counteract the bad ones, and it is only when there is no bad karma that you can see truth. But there is not a concept of growing, of maturing, of evolution. In the theosophical view, as I said, the idea is that we have to mature as souls. We learn, we develop skills, we develop understanding. So it doesn't, even if we are not creating wrong actions, that is not necessarily giving us real understanding. That is not necessarily purifying our nature. So it is not useful from this point of view to isolate ourselves from the world. And connected with this, and this is the last point that I'm going to mention, is that philosophically speaking, we could say that in essence, theosophy is non-dualistic, in the sense that from the theosophical point of view, duality is an illusion. The unity is the ultimate reality. But it's not a non-dualistic path in the regular way, because even though that is true, theosophy is concerned with the duality that we are part of, or that we are aware of in our present or current state of consciousness. So it's not dualist as many other paths. For example, the religions that talk about God and an evil figure as different, those are dualistic religions that think good and evil are different, spirit and matter are different, and there are dualistic paths in Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism. In most of the religions we have dualistic paths. We have also non-dualistic paths, which are usually the mystics of each religion. If you read the mystics in Christianity, they are all non-dualistic. They talk about union with God. They talk about transcending the distinction of good and evil, or of spiritual and matter. So also in every tradition you have the non-dualistic path. But the dualistic path puts too much emphasis, or puts emphasis on this dualism, this difference between good and evil. The non-dualistic path disregards the difference between good and evil and the reality or relative reality of matter. Theosophy usually, though, considers that unity is the ultimate reality. It pays quite a bit of attention to the duality that we are living in. So it's a path that tries to integrate both. And also in the spiritual development itself, Theosophy says that we should work on the two aspects of the human being, consciousness and the vehicle of consciousness. For example, as I said in the last series, when trying to explain this, consciousness would be our mind, for example, and the vehicle of consciousness would be our brain. So the vehicle of consciousness is the organ through which consciousness expresses itself. But there are organs not only at the physical level, if we want to call them organs. Our emotions are also a vehicle of our consciousness, of what we call emotional consciousness. Our mind is also a vehicle of the pure consciousness. So in Theosophy, we say that it is important to the insight is an activity of consciousness. The understanding is a quality of consciousness. It is important to grow in understanding, in perceiving truth. But we also say the problem is that many times the vehicle of consciousness doesn't allow this insight to arise or to manifest. So we have to take care also of the vehicle of consciousness. We have to purify our body, our emotions, and our minds. A non-dualistic path usually tends to, like, for example, in a more theosophical context, Krishnamurti's philosophy, and there are many other non-dualistic views, tend to disregard the vehicles of consciousness. They are illusion. Leave them alone. Try to expand your consciousness to have this insight. But as I said, in Theosophy, usually we try to pay attention to both things. It's not that this is better or worse. I want to emphasize that because in this talk I'm talking about the yoga of Theosophy, so I will emphasize how Theosophy sees this. But as we were saying, there is no single path that can provide everything. So every particular approach to spirituality is useful and is able to generate certain development which may be enough for a person because that person is pretty well developed already in some other aspects, or may not be enough. So I'm not trying to say that the theosophical approach is better than the others. I'm just trying to emphasize the particular features of the theosophical approach. So this is more or less what I wanted to share with you as a way of introduction. This idea of collective liberation, if we want to say, which will generate or bring the idea of service in the spiritual practice, the idea that no single path is enough, that we have to try to have a holistic approach, then the idea that spiritual life is to be practiced in our daily life, because that's where we can learn and work on ourselves. And the idea that we need to both expand our consciousness, grow in understanding, and at the same time purify our vehicles. Today some people think that they can get enlightenment without having to change any habit, either physical or emotional or mental. They don't have to bother about changing. They think that they can get a perception of truth just by repeating a mantra or by thinking or whatever. Usually that's not the view in the Theosophical Society. We need to change our life little by little to work on ourselves. We are not going to get an instant enlightenment. This idea of sudden enlightenment that is present in Zen, in Vedanta, in Krishnamurti, in Tibetan Buddhism, has a deep truth there. But it doesn't mean that a person, or at least everything that I say, is my point of view, and we are not authorities here. So that's something that we have to always keep in mind. But from my point of view, and I think that agrees with the Theosophical point of view in general, it doesn't mean that we can get instant enlightenment without doing anything. Some people think that because they go to yoga and they are vegetarian, they can get to nirvana this lifetime. And I had people come in and say that this person was disappointed because even though she was doing all this, yoga, vegetarianism, and she was counting the breathing twice a day, she wasn't getting enlightenment. So all ideas have to be understood in a deep spirit. If we don't understand them deeply, then we get a wrong idea and false expectations and probably for wrong actions in the spiritual path. So that's more or less what I wanted to share with you. In the next talks, we are going to talk about meditation, service, and study from the Theosophical point of view as spiritual practices, and practices that go at different levels. Meditation not only as a thing that we do in our room, sitting with our door shut, or service as just giving physical things, or study as just reading from books. These disciplines involve much more than that, and that's what we are going to explore in the next talks. So now, as usual, we have a moment to questions or comments, and from the internet also you can send us some questions. So is there any question or comment or experience that you want to share? Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's going to be hard to put this in words. It's kind of like a paradox. If we're already part of one, and everything's already one, why does it matter whether we choose a spiritual path or just continue to be selfish, or whether we do it out of selfishness or out of service? I mean, if we're already one, what difference does it make?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are all one, but at the same time we are caught in the illusion. For example, when we are having a nightmare, that nightmare is not real, but the state of suffering that is caused is real from a certain point of view. Everything is relative, but in the same way, we are all suffering. This suffering is an illusion, but we all feel the suffering. So we don't need to, when we talk about realizing truth, what we are talking about is getting rid of a wrong idea. For example, when we are watching a movie, we identify with whatever happens there, with the main character in the movie, and we cry with the main character, or we laugh, and there is an amazing power of identification in our consciousness. And even though we know that it is an illusion, it's a movie, it's not happening, and it's not ourselves, it's somebody that we don't know, yet we suffer because of this identification. So pure consciousness is beyond suffering. But this pure consciousness, when it works through the manifested planes, has this power of identification. And that generates suffering on the lower planes, as we say in Theosophy, not on the spiritual planes. So if we want to address the spiritual or the problem of humanity, if we are concerned about our suffering and therefore about other people's suffering, then it is important to realize how to get rid of this suffering. From an absolute point of view, it doesn't matter, because even from a theosophical view, if a soul doesn't get to enlightenment in this cycle of evolution, it will happen in the next one. But all this time, there will be a state of suffering in that soul. So enlightened people that stay with humanity to help humanity, they are really renouncing to truth for something that is an illusion, because they are renouncing to stay in the real nature of consciousness that is perfect bliss, to help with an illusion that is suffering. But yet on the relative plane, it is true. In Buddhism, they have this problem because on one hand they have this ideal of compassion, on the other hand they have this idea of nirvana as being the dissolution of all individuality. So many times they say, if there are no real people, there are no real individuals as something real, why do we bother about their suffering? So they talk about the absolute truth and the relative truth. So we can choose whatever we want, and people can choose whatever they want. It's not that there is an ultimate sin in not being spiritual, but we have to be aware that that means to keep on living immersed in suffering, which is an illusion, but as long as you think that it is true, it is true. So it's not a question of ultimate sin. It's a question of stopping the suffering. What do you think about that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's actually no good answer. I mean,
yeah, you can share it.
Wait till I get there.
All these questions, the answers are just images that we create. But
so you start off with the question: if we're all one, then why do we have to do anything? You obviously don't believe we're all one, or you wouldn't put the second part of the question. I mean, you're denying the first assumption by asking the question.
Yeah, in the sense that if we are all one, there is nobody that has to do anything. Yeah, but that, for example, that's true. But all depends from what angle you are looking at the thing. That's why I was saying that in Theosophy, we are in a difficult position, because we have to say, well, yeah, we are all one, and ultimately speaking, as I said, this is not a question that matters. But at the same time, as in Theosophy, we are involved or engaged in the relative suffering, in the relative duality. So it's a question of trying to recognize truth, but at the same time trying to work on what is empirically truth, if not ultimate truth. Yeah, one
comment before you ask your question.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is, once there's a total recognition of oneness, these questions don't come up.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's a good
mic. Yeah.
I do think it's a good question, and in part, you've answered it by that we are living in an illusion, and in this illusion we are fragmented. We are fragments of this one, and our experiences are this fragmented experience, and basically. We start from the wholeness of the one. We scatter into fragments. And by going through the process of involution and evolution, we return to the whole. But this now, we are conscious of that. Whereas in the, if there's a beginning and an end, in the ocean of oneness, there is no consciousness. We're not conscious of it. But by going through the evolution of individuality, we are gaining the consciousness eventually of being part of that whole. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. And I think, that's usually the point of view that you can find in theosophical literature. The difference is a difference of being aware or not of reality. And even though from an ultimate point of view, questions like this may be wrong in the sense that they are considering duality, from a practical point of view, they are real questions also. I like to try to, as much as I can, and it's very difficult, but I try to keep the view and the answer and the approach from both point of view, from the point of view of unity and also from the point of view of the empirical reality of what we really go through. Because we can say in a lecture like this, suffering is an illusion, but when we are suffering, it is very real. So we need to keep both views together and see how they harmonize or not, and how we can approach. I think it gives a depth if we try to solve duality from unity, and also if we can try to understand unity from duality. It gives a depth, but it also depends on how we are, what our approach is. So there are no true or wrong answers or questions.
I just want to add one thing to that. When you reach the equilibrium between study, meditation, and service, there is an experience that you have that can't be put into words. And I think that most of the scriptures will always say that it can't really be put into words. So it's one of the reasons we have to study so many different things, because we're looking at it from all different angles and we're just missing it.
That's the start. All communication is about spiritual matters is very limited. So the reality is beyond anything that we can express. But at the same time, we need some words, some help that may help us look in the right direction. For example, if we consider in an immature way, we are all one, so I don't care about somebody else's suffering, we may, if that is a philosophical assumption, not a realization, we may become very cold people and selfish. Or if we are too much worried about suffering, then if we don't understand that suffering has a purpose and that from a higher reality point of view suffering is an illusion, if we don't understand this, we don't have the right balance to face our suffering and other people's suffering. So according to how we view life is how we are going to act. That's why it's important to try to, little by little, get to a right view of life, although the right view of life is beyond any view. But we can approach it little by little until we can just throw every idea out and have the perception, the direct perception. I don't know if on the internet is you can refresh and check. Just not to neglect those who are in a different state of illusion or reality. Not physically present.
You have to put your email in. It's too hard.
Oh, it's too hard, yeah.
Can you get stuck in the idea of enlightenment?
Yeah, can you repeat so they can hear?
Can you get stuck in the idea of enlightenment? You had mentioned that woman who, through her spiritual practices, got frustrated that she couldn't reach enlightenment through them. And, is it the path along the way, or is it don't lose sight of the goal? Is it the end result? Or is it both?
Yes, the question was, just in case you couldn't hear, if we can get stuck in this idea of enlightenment, if this is a goal or is the path, you said something like that. Many times, whatever philosophy is particularly in fashionable, let's say, at the moment, is responding to a previous philosophy that was seeing some things in a wrong way. Because, for example, when a spiritual teacher appears, that spiritual teacher addresses the wrong views that the previous spiritual path has produced. It's not a problem of most of the times, it's not a problem of the philosophy itself, but people misunderstanding the philosophy. Because as we said, ideas are always limited. So it's like you try to define truth or to catch truth with your two hands. So when you get hold of truth here, you are missing all this. Then you get truth here and you are missing all that. So when you expose or you talk about spirituality in certain way, you are always missing some other points of view. So, for example, when people were thinking that there were many incarnations and that we had time to evolve or to get liberated from suffering, then that would generate, and actually did, in many people, to say, well, in this life it is too hard to be a good person, so I'll wait for the next life. I don't have to worry now. Probably next life when I'm in a better condition, I don't have a family, I'm not with this difficult person, and then I will have another opportunity. And then to prevent that, that's a wrong view, because even from the point of view of reincarnation, your next life will be the result of what you did in this one. So then comes another spiritual teacher that says, no, there is only one life. This is your only chance. Whatever you do now, it will produce a result, and whatever you don't do now will produce its own result also. So concentrate all your energy in this particular life. Forget about other lives. There are no lives. So it doesn't matter what the reality is. What matters is what the attitude you get from this. Now, then people, again, misunderstanding truth, may think, oh, this is my only chance, and what if I'm wrong? What if I do something wrong? Then I will be for the whole eternity suffering, or then, all this sense of fear and fear for eternal punishment comes, and then you may have to talk again about different lives and say, no, whatever you do wrong, you will have to go again through those activities and learn again. So when you see how spiritual teachings are given, you can see that they are trying to reshape the view that the previous one was producing. So right now we are in a stage where many traditions that are followed by people are saying there is the possibility of a sudden enlightenment. Why? Because we came in the past, we had the idea of a hard work to reach the goal. And even during the religious time, to get to heaven, you had to be, a good person and work on yourself. So now there is this idea that you are already enlightened. You have everything there. It's not that you have to acquire something. And you just have to let go of the illusion, and you can get sudden enlightenment. And there is a deep truth there. But this sudden enlightenment is not in terms of chronological time. So when people don't understand this, they think that whatever we are, we can get enlightenment in the next minute, with all the ambition that produces. Because if they would understand really what enlightenment means, there could not be ambition for that. But the truth, when it is misunderstood, many times is worse than the illusion. So today, I think we have to emphasize again that this sudden enlightenment is not what it seems to be. That yes, when you are dealing with yourself, you may have a sudden enlightenment regarding that, in the sense that you can have an insight and really uproot the problem in yourself. And that insight could eventually be so deep that you realize truth. But you have to be ready for that. And for that you need certain work on yourself. You are not going to have that deep insight if your mind is full of illusions, if your emotions are full of attachments and wrong, with wrong emotions. So we need to prepare ourselves to be able to have these insights. Krishnamurti used to say, trying to solve this paradox, he said, if you have a room that is full of furniture, you cannot open the window for the breeze to enter. So the first thing you have to do is to put order in your room. Once you put order in your room, you open the window and the breeze may enter. But the breeze will enter whenever the breeze happens to be there. It's not that by you putting order in the room, you are forcing the breeze to enter. So in the same way, we have to put order in our consciousness for the enlightenment to come. It doesn't mean that just by putting order in our consciousness, just by being vegetarian and all these rather superficial things, we are going to get enlightenment. But having a pure life, having pure emotions and thoughts are necessary for the insight to come. So from a theosophical point of view, we would say that thinking about enlightenment is in itself something that is telling you don't understand what enlightenment is. Because the very seeking for enlightenment is what prevents enlightenment. So I think that Nisargadatta, who was an enlightened Hindu or being, he was from the Vedanta tradition, he used to say, the ambition of the yogi to get liberation is so much material than the ambition of a person to have a big house and cars and all that. This yogi trying to get liberation is much more materialistic than the person that. And it's like that, After all, we are trying to look for something for the psychological self, which is an illusion.